Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The room smelled faintly of roasted almonds and vanilla, the soft hum of the evening wrapping around everything like a secret. I sat at the edge of the counter, fingertips still glistening from the warm caramel I had been tasting, the sweetness clinging to my lips longer than it should have. My heart jumped when I heard the door creak, too sudden, too quiet. He stepped in, his gaze catching mine before it wandered to my hands, the slightest curve tugging at the corner of his mouth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes locked on me, steady, unhurried, but heavy enough to make my breath hitch. I instinctively wiped my fingers against the napkin, but it was too late. His hand brushed mine as he reached for it, the warmth lingering like a spark that shouldn't have meant anything, but did. The silence was thick now, laced with something neither of us named. I could hear my own heartbeat, too loud, too fast. He leaned just close enough for me to feel the heat from his skin, the air shifting between us, teasing, daring. "Caramel?" he asked, his voice low, almost amused. I nodded, but my throat felt dry. The way his fingers hovered near mine again, not quite touching this time, sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cool air from the window. His eyes didn't leave mine, dark, searching, and utterly unreadable. I swallowed, pulse still drumming, waiting for him to say something, anything. But instead, he took one slow step closer, his shadow spilling over me, his hand resting on the counter beside my hip. There was a pause, just a heartbeat's worth, before he leaned in, his breath brushing against my cheek. And then, the air between us still felt heavy after that moment in the kitchen, but neither of us spoke about it. Instead, I turned away, pretending to wipe the counter though my hands trembled slightly. His presence lingered behind me, warm and familiar, yet distant in a way that had become too common lately. We hadn't always been like this. There was a time when our nights were filled with laughter that spilled over midnight coffee cups and lazy weekend mornings tangled in sheets. But lately, something had shifted, small at first, like a door left slightly ajar. Missed dinners turned into quiet silences, and words we once said freely became thoughts we swallowed down instead. I felt his gaze on my back, heavy and searching. "Long day?" he asked, his tone casual, but the way his fingers tapped against the counter betrayed something more. I nodded. "Yours?" "Same," he murmured. The silence stretched, and I hated how used to it we'd become. There were moments, like tonight, when a sudden touch or a glance seemed to pull us back to who we were, but just as quickly, it would slip through our fingers like sand. I wondered if he felt it too, the pull and the ache of wanting to bridge the gap, and the fear of what we might uncover if we tried. I busied myself with the dishes, letting the warm water calm my racing mind. Behind me, he moved closer, his hand brushing my elbow as he reached for a glass. It was nothing, really. Just an accidental touch. But it sent a shiver down my spine, a reminder that the space between us wasn't always empty, it was charged, waiting. "Smells good in here," he said, his voice low, the kind he used to whisper when the world outside didn't exist. "Caramel," I replied softly. He chuckled, that same low sound that once made my heart skip. "Haven't had that in a while." I wanted to turn around, to say something real, ask him why we become strangers in our own home. But instead, I rinsed the spoon and said nothing, because saying something meant opening a door I wasn't sure either of us was ready to walk through. The clock ticked softly, each second heavier than the last. He stayed beside me, too close to ignore, too far to hold. And in that quiet kitchen, with the caramel cooling on the stove, I felt the weight of everything we didn't say pressing down on us both. The kitchen had gone too quiet, the kind of quiet that hummed with unsaid words. He lingered close, a little too close, his hands still on the glass, but his eyes weren't on the sink anymore. They were on me. I felt it before I looked at him, that familiar heat creeping up my neck, the sharp tug in my chest that made it hard to breathe normally. "You've been busy," he said, voice steady but edged with something I couldn't quite place, something sharper than curiosity. "Trying to keep things together," I answered lightly, but my fingers tightened around the dishcloth. His gaze dropped briefly to my hands, then back to my face. "Always with your hands full." The way he said it, half a tease, half something else, made my stomach twist. I turned to face him fully, more out of defiance than ease. "You've been coming home late a lot," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He raised an eyebrow, that faint smirk tugging again at his lips. "Jealous?" The word hit the air like a spark. I laughed softly, a sound that didn't feel real. "Should I be?" For a moment, the air between us pulsed with something neither of us wanted to name. His eyes softened, then darkened, like he wanted to say something he knew he shouldn't. His hand rested on the counter, inches from mine, and my breath caught, because all it would take was a slight movement, one reckless choice, and everything would tilt. "I'm here now," he murmured, voice low enough to almost be a secret. And I hated how much that simple sentence burned its way through me. Because in that moment, the distance between us wasn't made of silence anymore, it was made of tension, heat, and all the questions we weren't ready to ask. The night had wrapped the house in quiet, the kind that made every sound sharper, every breath heavier. I turned off the stove and leaned against the counter, trying to busy my hands while my heart drummed like it had a mind of its own. He was still there, close, steady, as if leaving was never an option. "Everyone's asleep," he said softly, his voice almost swallowed by the low hum of the fridge. "I know," I replied, my own voice a little too quiet, a little too careful. For a heartbeat, we just stood there, the faint glow of the pendant lights painting shadows across his jaw. He moved closer, not abruptly, but with that unspoken intention that made the space between us shrink until it barely existed. I could feel the heat of his breath, the brush of his sleeve against my arm. The counter behind me felt suddenly too firm, too real, as if the whole room had narrowed down to just this point, this inch of space, this pull that neither of us named but both felt. His hand reached out, hovering for a second before resting near my hip on the cool marble. "You've been different lately," he said, eyes searching mine, low enough to sound almost like a confession. "Maybe you just haven't been looking," I whispered, before I realized I had. The words hung between us, electric. His jaw tightened slightly, his gaze not breaking for a second. There was a flicker, something reckless in his expression, something that dared me to step back, but I didn't. "Tell me what's really going on," he murmured, his voice dipping lower, the world beyond that kitchen fading to nothing but the steady rhythm of breath and heartbeat. And then, just as his fingers inched closer, there was a sudden sound from the hallway. A floorboard creaking. Footsteps. We both froze. The hallway noise faded, but the damage was done, our breath caught midair, our bodies still locked in that charged, narrow space. He stepped back half an inch, enough for the night air to slip between us again, but his eyes didn't leave mine. They were darker now, heavier, as if a decision had already been made somewhere behind them. "I can't keep pretending this isn't there," he said finally, his voice rougher than before. I blinked, unsure whether to ask what he meant or admit that I already knew. My pulse thudded against my throat, heat crawling under my skin. "What are you saying?" He took a step closer again, his hand bracing the counter beside me, caging me in without touching me. "I see the way you look at me. I feel it when you pull away." The words sank in, each one a confession wrapped in accusation. My fingers curled against the cool marble, seeking something steady as the room seemed to tilt. "We're married," I whispered, more to remind myself than him. "Exactly," he shot back, his voice low, sharp with the pain he'd been hiding. "And yet, it feels like you've been somewhere else. With someone else." The world seemed to go still at that, his eyes searching mine, waiting. And there it was, the truth I had kept folded away like a fragile letter, the messages, the missed nights, the soft conversations I told myself meant nothing. I turned my head slightly, but his voice pulled me back. Was it him? The question hung in the air, raw and bare. I couldn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because the truth would shatter what little bridge we had left. His jaw tensed, a bitter laugh escaping as he stepped back, raking a hand through his hair. I knew it, he said, not in anger, but in that quiet, broken way that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. I wanted to reach out, to explain that it hadn't been what he thought, that the gap between us had grown so wide I had started to fill it with words that never should have been said to anyone else. But before I could, he turned back toward me, eyes burning with a mix of betrayal and desire that made my knees weak. Then tell me why you're still here, he murmured, his hand almost reaching for mine again, almost. And in that moment, I didn't know if he was going to walk away, or close the space between us for good. The silence after his words felt heavier than any shout could have. The air in the kitchen was thick, warm with the lingering scent of caramel and something far more volatile, truth, finally breaking through the cracks. I could feel my hands trembling as they gripped the counter, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. He let out a harsh breath, somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. That's the thing about lines. You don't mean to cross them until you're already standing on the other side. His words cut deep, but I didn't flinch this time. I turned toward him, really turned, meeting his gaze head-on. And what about you? Pretending everything was fine while you drifted further away, leaving me to fill the silence alone? That stopped him. For a second, his anger faltered, and in its place came something else, guilt, maybe. His hand, still braced on the counter, dropped slowly to his side. So this is on me? It's on both of us, I said, my voice steady now despite the ache pressing against my chest. We stopped talking. We stopped trying. And I started looking for pieces of you in places they didn't belong. The room pulsed with the weight of the confession. His shoulders rose and fell with a sharp inhale, his jaw tight but his eyes softer now. Conflicted, hurt, but still searching. Do you want this to end? He asked quietly. That question lingered longer than it should have. I shook my head slowly. No. I want it to be real again. I want to stop pretending that nothing's broken when we both feel the cracks every day. He stepped closer, not with the same charged tension as before, but with something quieter, heavier. Then we start over, he said, voice low but firm. But I need to know it's us. Just us. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, the weight of everything spilling into that one fragile moment. I ended it, I whispered. Before it went too far. His gaze lingered on me, searching for the truth behind my words. And when he finally nodded, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close to a choice. He reached out, fingers brushing mine, tentative, unsure, but real. Then prove it, he murmured. And in that fragile silence, the distance between us didn't feel impossible anymore, it felt like the first step back. The kitchen no longer felt like a battleground. The tension that had once clawed at every word now softened, replaced by something quieter, almost fragile. The clock ticked past midnight, and the world outside was still, as if holding its breath for us. He stood in front of me, no longer guarded, no longer distant. His fingers brushed mine again, this time without hesitation, and I didn't pull away. The warmth of his touch spread slowly, melting the chill that had settled in my chest for weeks. I don't want to lose this, he said, his voice low, almost breaking. Not because of mistakes, not because we stopped listening. I felt my throat tighten, but this time it wasn't with guilt, it was with relief. Then let's not, I whispered. Let's stop letting the silence win. He gave a small, shaky laugh, one I hadn't heard in a long time. You always were better with words. I smiled, faint but real. You always understood them, even when I didn't say them out loud. The distance between us disappeared in one small step. His arms slipped around my waist, gently, not claiming but inviting. I leaned into it, letting my head rest against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my cheek, a sound I had missed more than I had admitted, even to myself. The caramel scent still lingered in the air, sweet and warm, and I realized how much it felt like this moment. Not perfect, but enough to remind me of why we started. "I'll be here," he murmured against my hair. "But we fix this together, not alone." "Together," I echoed, my fingers curling around his shirt. He tilted my chin up, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, the kind of look that doesn't need words, only the quiet promise that what's broken can still be mended. And when his lips finally met mine, it wasn't rushed or desperate, it was slow, certain, like a homecoming after a long storm. The night didn't erase what had happened, but it gave us something better, a beginning that felt like forgiveness.